Welcome to the Q&A for The Game at the 46th Annual Toronto International Film Festival. I'm here with Anna Lazarevic, the filmmaker of The Game. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I was so kind of surprised and delighted when I saw this film. It felt like a hidden gem, something I wasn't expecting. And I just really would like you to talk to our audience who has hopefully just seen your film about how it came about. It was in the making for quite a while. So can you talk about the production and that journey?
Yeah, it was quite a long journey. So I made a short film while I was at Columbia University, and it was about a smuggler who finds himself actually in a trafficking situation. And that story was inspired by actually young boys who were leaving Afghanistan. There was this migration of people through, from the Middle East through the Balkans, and their destination country at that time. For some it was the UK, for some it was Sweden, but it was actually inspired by young boys who were leaving Afghanistan. And a friend of mine, as a journalist, she interviewed some young boys who were as young as 11, and she told me some of their stories, and I was really distraught by them. But I didn't really think oh, this is my story to tell, I have to do this. It was just sort of like piece by piece, things came together, and I was inspired by people I had met. And I made a short film, which, I was really proud of. And this is back in 2010 or 2011 when we finished that. And ever since then, I had been trying to figure out how to take what it is that I really loved about the short and make the feature version of that. And I had, interviewed refugees in Greece, also stayed in an asylum center in Serbia and Western Serbia. And this was before the migration wave that happened in 2015. And in 2015, all the stories that I had been learning about and I had been collecting, they became front page news. A lot of people, we all got to become aware of what was happening and the brutality against refugees and the way refugees are treated when they're crossing borders. And there was all these stories that I had been collecting, and now we were all aware of it. And it was, it was really, I don't know. And in 2015, I had still been trying to figure out exactly, I made a short film, but it was I was trying to replicate that short film, and find those moments that I really loved and do that again because it worked so well for the short. And I was working with the same lead, the lead actor who's in this, Branislav Trifunovic, was also in the short. So I was really trying to find those moments and try to replicate them, and that wasn't going to happen. You just can't do that. And I was really interested in finding and meeting younger. I was inspired by the story of unaccompanied minors, younger boys. But I wound up meeting this group of teenagers who were hanging out in a park in Belgrade. And I had my cousin, who's a photographer, with me. She's a little bit younger than me. And this group of teenagers, they were ranged in ages from 15 to 18. And they had, really cool sneakers on and fresh haircuts and cool outfits. And they were just really friendly with me and my cousin. And I also had another colleague with me. And they were one of them was kind of making faces for us to take photos. Cool. And, I started talking to them, and I started asking them all these questions of what was their travel like and what did they experience and all this. But, we sort of kind of put all that to the side and just sort of started hanging out, because I felt like that's what they wanted. I felt like I don't think they wanted to keep talking about their journey. And although that is people should know of what's happening to refugees, and that's a worthy story. But I think they just wanted to kind of, chill out, kind of take a break from what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I think that also was the best thing for me, because I think all this time when I had been meeting people, it was what was I really looking for, and and I kept asking all these questions, but I already knew all that information. I think what I really needed was like that personal connection with someone, you know, to feel like that friendship, the kinship, you know. I think I really needed that to give myself even permission to explore these characters. And then that night, my cousin was telling me that some of them were sending her messages on Facebook Messenger and like rose emojis and like kind of sending her like cute little things. And I was like, this is so funny. Like, of course they had been through so much. They were this group of teens. They were from Syria. They had been through so much. We're still in touch. I visited them in Germany a couple of times. So of course they had been through so much, but at the same time, I think that when people go through certain situations like theirs, I think they need that sense of normalcy even more, you know. And that was kind of the thing that I observed with them. That was something that I've observed with some of my cousins going through what they went through in Serbia. Some of my friends when they were teenagers during the war in Bosnia. Who, you know, one of my friends, she was telling me about how her and her friends would like sneak out to a house party, you know, in Bosnia, you know, like during the war. But it was like, yes, like they're going through hardship, but it's like you need that community, you need that sense of normalcy. So anyway, so that was that was like my big like aha moment. And that was like this thing that just allowed me to explore the story even further. And so, yeah. And then I wound up not working with the teens who inspired the story because they were already settled in Germany. And, you know, we had explored that option. I had talked to them about it, but ultimately I felt like it just would have been wrong to take them out of a home that they're settled in to bring them back into this experience of them on the road again. I just didn't feel right about that. So they were the inspiration, but they weren't the ones acting in the film. And then I wound up meeting Yousef, who is the supporting role, Mehdi and Amr and Hamid. And they're two sets of brothers. Here and Yousef and Hamid and Mehdi are actually brothers. And then they brought a lot of themselves, of course, inevitably to the film. So everything that you see in the film is inspired by true accounts. It's American film, but it's all inspired by people's real experiences. Even the young woman in the film, Eva, she's inspired by, she is inspired by a character that I had met, or a person that I had met who's friends with some of my friends.
What you say about the first group of teens that you met, that completely comes across in the film. I mean, Yousef is and his brother are going through some potentially serious stuff, but they still want to, you know, go out to a club. They still want to hang out with their friends. They still want to maintain this sense of normalcy. And it feels like maybe because they're non-actors, that also sense of authentic teenness comes across. Why was it important for you to work with non-actors instead of, you know, getting professionals who could play this part?
Yeah, for me, it was like never a question to work with professional actors for the show. It was just so many things. I think one is also like maybe the main thing is like a responsibility to people who are going through this. I feel that, you know, I need to be as authentic as possible, and I need to have a member from that community represent themselves. You know, I mean, yeah, I think that was the main thing, is just feeling a sense of responsibility. I wanted to be a collaborator in their story. I wanted them to also, you know, because they're going to be the most authentic voice. Like, I have my experiences of being an immigrant and things that I went through, but I'm not a refugee, and I haven't, you know, so I know that, yeah, just to have them representing themselves was the most important thing. Also, I guess it's like, you know, it's also a taste thing for me too. Like, I'm a huge fan of Abbas Kiarostami films. I actually studied with Abbas in Cuba. And I, all the while, knew that I wanted to work with non-actors. Yeah.
That influence completely comes across in the film too, of the Kiarostami road movie, the way that the camera makes you feel like a passenger in the car for so much of your film. Um, I wanted to know, like, when you were writing this film, we see Strahinja, right? I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly, but we see his character and how he interacts with his family and his kind of normal relationship to this job that he has. But this, of course, changes when he meets Yousef. What was it for you that really changed in him to kind of open him up to this family and this experience in a different way?
What was it for me that,
Yeah, when you were
what I
creating
did
the
was
character, yeah.
the thing that actually like got under his skin and made him. I think, yeah, I had been thinking about this a lot, especially with the script, because it's like this thing of like, you know, you need a character to change and to have an arc. But at the same time, you know, I'm always like, I'm a perfectionist and I'm always like, oh, is this like, you know, being cheesy? Am I like trying to force this thing that isn't natural? Like what actually happens in real life? And, you know, screenwriters were always having this kind of debate and conversation about character arcs and characters changing. And it was a little bit difficult for me because it was just like, I just didn't want to do something that was, I guess, you know, cheesy or inauthentic, mm-hmm. or and just have this character all of a sudden grow and become, you know, become different in some way. So I think the way that I think about him and his journey is that he has had it all along in his heart, that he is a person who actually is, the way that I see him is that he's a person who's actually very sensitive. And, you know, the film also really touches on, you know, toxic masculinity and, you know, his inability to communicate his emotions and to be there emotionally for his ex-wife and for his son. And so, but the way that I see him is that actually like he doesn't change, but he just becomes more of who he is. And that was I guess in a way easier for me to think about the film in that way and to write the film from that perspective. But I think that also he's a very, you know, volatile person and he has his vices. And I really wanted to show those. And I think Branislav Trifunovic, who plays Strahinja, I think he does, he portrays that character marvelously. I don't think I would have wanted to work with any other actor. I think he had that kind of in him and understood, you know, his dark sides as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many of films about similar subject matter where it has a very savior arc. And I feel like,
oh my God,
yeah. And you didn't do that here.
Okay,
there's
good.
a very realistic kind of movement, you know, as a character where Yousef is also just as active in some ways as he is. So what I want to ask also where this was filmed, because we actually go through a couple of different spaces, urban spaces, and then like kind of rural spaces in between borders. And where was this shot?
We shot everything in Serbia. And because I was working with refugees who didn't have documentation and the ability to travel, initially I had wanted to actually do the real route because I had driven through this route. I'd taken many trips to see what these locations look like and what would it be like, kind of putting myself in the characters' shoes. Like what I would drive to places and be like, oh, I could just like I was looking at the map on my phone. I was like, that's the border right there. I could just like walk over there. No, you know? And so I really, really wanted to be as authentic as possible and actually do this journey with the film, but it wasn't possible logistically for a number of reasons. But the number one reason being that I'm working with refugees. So, and they, you know, they couldn't leave. You know, they were at an asylum center in Belgrade. So we shot everything in Serbia, but just north of Belgrade, it used to be, that territory used to be Austro-Hungaria, and Croatia as well was Austro-Hungaria. So all of the Austro-Hungarian towns are built pretty much the same. In terms of like the layout and the architecture of what the facades look like for the most part. And it's really remarkable. And so we were just very careful and selective in what parts of the town we were filming to be Zagreb. And I'm sure, you know, someone from Zagreb is going to be like, you know, I'm sure my friends are going to be like, oh, come on, you know, blah, blah, blah. but, you know, I mean, because we were filming in like a, you know, in a smaller town that had to substitute Zagreb. But look, there's parts of Zagreb that look like that parts of town. You know, it's like we're filming in what's supposed to be kind of the outskirt of Zagreb. You know, we're never filming in like what's supposed to be downtown Zagreb. So yeah, so it was all Serbia, and we were very careful. I mean, the location, there wasn't a lot of production design, but the location scouting was a big, important feature of this film, because, you know, we had to find places in Serbia that were going to replicate what that looks like. Right. And we had to be really particular and really specific, you know, and I had an amazing location scout, you know, who would be like, we would talk about rivers and like, you know, what the characteristics of these rivers are like and how this one is different from that one and so we had to find those specific things that could replicate that specific river, you know, where it's wider, where it's more dangerous, where it's narrower, where it's safer to cross, which is, you know, what they're looking for in the film. Yeah, so that was a big job. That was a really big job, is to find these exterior locations, especially.
Okay. This feels like a very timely movie, ultimately, and one that is very relevant to everything that's happening in the world now. But I just wanted to ask you, you know, why do you think this film is important now, and what would you like people to take away?
Yeah, so I mentioned I was born in Serbia, and I immigrated to the U.S. when I was young, and you know, growing up in Serbia, what we call like the Western world, you know, I was kind of frustrated by the way that people saw people who were from places that were experiencing conflict. Mm-hmm. I was kind of frustrated in the way that we kind of you know, pigeonhole people, and you just have this association when you hear the word refugee, mm-hmm. Or when you hear Serbia or Bosnia, you know, and one of my closest friends is Bosnian. She and I talk about this all the time, of this kind of association, this kind of way that you kind of just, you know, just put so much on this person. And at what point are we dehumanizing people? Like, at what point are we having empathy for people who are in difficult situations? And in what ways are we kind of just seeing them as different? You know, there's, I really love Disclosure, that documentary about trans representation. And in the documentary, they talk about how, you know, to show trans people suffering again and again and again in media, how does that affect the audience and how we perceive trans people? And how does it affect people who are trans, and how do they see themselves, that their life is just going to be about suffering, you know? So I felt like what they had to say in that documentary made a lot of sense, and was like speaking to the way that I was thinking about this film. And what I mean by that is, like, what I want people to really take away from this film is just like, I want you to see these characters as not as other people going through some difficult situations, as refugees, as people from war-torn countries, you know, even the smuggler. You know, he's an economically marginalized person, you know. I really wanted to put the audience in like the living room with them, to hang out with them. Mm-hmm. You know, imagine what it's like to listen to this guy's like Spotify playlist. You know, like, see this person, these boys were beatboxers. They're freaking beatboxers. Like, that's amazing. Like, I want people to see them as not just, oh, that's someone out there in the world. I want you to see them as your friend, as your family members, you know? And I think when we see people in that way, we just care about their situation so much more, and certain things become unacceptable. You know, I mean, as the film is pretty light in a way, there's some traumatic events that happen in the film, which I had to stay true to the real events that are happening. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to show that, but the film really, like, the violence and things are kind of in the background for the most part of the film. It's not a film that's provocative. It's not a film that sensationalizes violence, and that's done with purpose, with intention. Because I just really want you to see another aspect of these characters in order to care about that other thing so much more. And just to kind of talk about what's happening in real life, the situations are changing in terms of how refugees are being treated. But there was an incident in October that human rights groups had marked or had referred to as a marked escalation in violence against refugees. There was an incident in October of 2020 where a minor was sexually assaulted by authorities in Croatia. And this is not to, I'm not trying to make Croatia sound bad. It's not a Croatian problem. It's not a Greek problem. It's not a Hungarian problem. It's not a Serbian problem. It's just that I think that there are things that we're all aware of, like how refugees are treated. We're all aware of it now, but like, I think a lot of people are outraged, but I still think that there's things that are happening that are absolutely unacceptable. And if we saw that this could happen to our family members, I think that we would all treat it differently.
Yeah. I think this film beautifully shows how these small moments of connection lead to, bigger acts of empathy and risk. And I really appreciate this film and your perspective on it. Thanks so much for joining us, Anna.
Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it.